It's Monday, September 13th, 2021. Before I call the meeting to order, I would like to say a few things about how we will conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual procedures. Due to the ongoing pandemic, Council Chair Zelle has determined that it is not reasonable or prudent to conduct in-person meetings at this time. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Transportation Committee will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. Before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. With that, Becky, can you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Here.
Cummings.
Here.
Ferguson. Fredson.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Sterner.
Aye, here.
Zirin.
Zirin's present.
Barber.
Here. With that, I can call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for September 13th, 2021. First item on our agenda today is actually approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or additions to the agenda, we can move ahead to the meeting or the meeting minutes. All right, seeing and hearing no changes, we will deem the agenda approved. Moving on to approval of the minutes. It's the minutes of the August 23rd, 2021 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes, last meeting.
Moved by
Sterner.
Sterner. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez.
Seconded by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson. Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the minutes are approved. Our next item is the TAC report. I believe we have David Fenley here today.
Hello, good afternoon,
Welcome,
Chair
David.
Barber, and council members. Now that other people are calling you Barb, I'm gonna really struggle to not do that myself.
I will
have a
still
lot
answer, not to worry.
I have a lot of other Barbs in my life, so I just might revert to Barb. It's great to be here with you all. The Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, we had another fantastic meeting this month on the 1st of September. I'll give you a quick update on stuff that we are working on. We've had quite a number of updates on the relatively new Metro Transit app, and we've been providing feedback to you all on that. It's really nice to see that it's rolling out in a very accessible manner. And yeah, it just makes everything easier for folks, everybody, including folks with disabilities, when it comes to booking trips. We did have a great department, I guess, meeting or introduction from John Levin at Strategic Initiatives. He really did a good job of laying out how Strategic Initiatives kind of brings together other departments and maybe builds capacity in those departments when things are happening. And we had some thoughts on ways we can dig more into some of the data that they like to use to determine what they can work on. So I think we're going to probably schedule something again with him to get a little more weedy with Strategic Initiatives to see if we can help out with some ideas there. We will be having, I would say probably the next month or two, our priority seating education promo video should be coming out, maybe even sooner than that. So that's exciting. One thing that we were a little dismayed by, but do understand the logic behind, is the reduction of the regular route fares. Obviously, that's to increase ridership, and how that was not transferred over to Metro Mobility, but we do understand the logic behind that, even though it doesn't seem totally equitable. We're not necessarily looking to boost Metro Mobility ridership, but the reasoning behind the decision that you made does make sense. We did have a small idea on that. Maybe I can just plant the seed now in your heads. Rather than reducing the fare for Metro Mobility, the potential to further reduce the fare for passengers who have disabilities, because I know they already have a reduced fare on regular route and light rail. So just a thought, just a thought. Um, um, oh yeah, and we continue. We didn't get an update from the microtransit pilot in North Minneapolis this month, but we have been ongoingly working behind the scenes to provide feedback on that RFP and that microtransit program, because it is fantastic to finally have at least a small area of the Twin Cities to have some on-demand, fully accessible transportation, which right now doesn't really exist. There are some taxis, but who knows when they're going to be available. So it's nice to have some on-demand, accessible transportation available for folks with disabilities. That is everything I have. I flew through my update, so I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, David. Are there any questions from council members? I don't see any, just a couple quick comments. Thank you for the feedback on the app and also the Metro Mobility. But also I am really excited to hear that you are involved behind the scenes with some of the work on the microtransit project, because that is really meant to connect everybody. And so I'm really happy to hear that you're engaged with that process. And I would love to continue to hear your feedback on that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Chair Barber and council members.
Thank you very much. All right, next we're on to other reports. We have MTS Director. We have Acting Director Amy Benowitz here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Just 2 items today. I believe I mentioned a few months ago that we would be kicking off our transit onboard survey this fall. This is a survey we do every 5 years to really survey our customers on trip purposes, origins, destinations, that type of information. And then we use it to augment our regional travel model. And I just wanted to let you know that the pre-test for the transit onboard survey is actually starting tomorrow. And we will have survey takers out on a number of routes, the A line, C line, the blue line, and the green line. So this is just the pre-test, but then we'll continue with the actual survey in the coming weeks. So if you hear feedback from customers or anyone curious about the transit onboard survey, definitely let me know when we can follow up with them. The second item I have today is just a quick update on our motor vehicle sales tax collections. Continued really good news on the MVES collections. We ended the state fiscal year, which ended actually at the end of June, and collections were up 113% over forecast, which is a little over 30 million for the state fiscal year for us. And through July and August, we've had continued good collections, and at the moment we're looking to end the year up about 114%. So that's good fiscal news for us on the transit side. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there questions from council members? All I have is that's really great news on MVES. So that definitely helps us as we do some planning into the future here. So very good news. Now we're on to Metro Transit General Manager Quistra.
Thank you, Chair Barber. I'll have a couple of just quick updates. One on COVID. We're now, since the start of the pandemic, we're at 506 cases among Metro Transit employees. As the Delta variant spreads, we continue to see cases among employees rise. I have looked at June as a baseline of when we were at our low with only 2 cases total. July, we were at 14. In August, we had 36 total cases. We remain focused on educating customers about our mask requirement, including providing masks to customers who try to board without a mask. I also want to mention that Metro Transit's COVID Incident Command Team continues to work towards implementing the council's vaccine and test requirements that goes into effect on October 11th. This includes finalizing weekday testing options and the process for employees to submit information about vaccination data, or their vaccination status rather. And we believe our program matches the expectations for large employers announced by the president last week. So we think we're in good shape in that regard. Also want to talk a little bit about the St. Paul Public Schools. As you likely heard last week, we're working with St. Paul Public Schools to help transport students to 4 high schools in the face of the school bus driver shortage that we're all sharing, I might add. School started last Thursday, and so far existing services on bus and LRT have been able to accommodate students in bus operations and with service development. We're continuing to try to refine bus assignments, place more 60-foot buses on trips that are most likely to be used by the St. Paul Public Schools students to protect for overloads. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there questions from council members?
Madam Chair?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Wes, I'm wondering if Saturday's driver outage, operator outage was an anomaly, or is that something that we're continuing to see, or where do we stand with that?
Well, if for rail, it's an anomaly, and I'll give a little more detail on that. You know, we go through, we have a bus operator shortage currently, but we have our full staff complement for rail operators. We do have an unusual number of rail operators that are out with long-term sicknesses or needs, or longer term. I shouldn't say long-term, but longer term. But on Saturday, we felt like we had the coverage we needed for a Saturday schedule, but we ended up with 7 additional call-ins, sick call-ins on Saturday. And I think that the news kind of came out that we lost trips and so forth. What really happened was we adjusted some 10-minute service down to 15-minute service. We adjusted some 15-minute service down to 20-minute service. We made adjustments to the schedule in that way so that the frequency was lowered a little bit, but typically by 5 minutes. I think in the evening hours we reduced it by a 20-minute schedule to a half-hour schedule, like by 10 minutes. So it was certainly something we don't want to see happen, and certainly something we haven't seen happen on rail with any frequency. I think we went for 5 straight years without missing rail trips. So we have a good record on rail, but this is a combination of having a number of people that were called in sick prior to Saturday, an unusual number, and that we knew were going to be out, and then having that added to by 7 that we did not expect. So that's really the background on that. Thanks for
Thank
asking.
you. Thanks.
Thank you, Wes. Are there additional questions from council members? All right, on to the rest of our business for the evening. Tonight, there are no items on consent. So we'll move to our first non-consent item, which is business item 2021-241, the 2022 to 25 Transportation Improvement Program. And we have Joe Barbeau here to present. Where's,
Sorry. Thanks, Madam Chair.
okay,
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the tip that I just came back to TAB, and TAB recommended approval after a 45-day public comment period. I believe I had a presentation in June, so a little bit of this might be review, but I go through it pretty quickly. So you can go to the next slide. So briefly, a tip is a 4-year list of any transportation project that is funded in whole or part with federal funding. That is a federal law that any urbanized area has to have this type of a program. MnDOT actually does a lot of the work on preparing the data that creates the tip, and they go a little bit above and beyond. They have state funded projects included in the tip as well. That's not federally required, but they do that, and it creates some seamlessness if funding sources are changed in any projects. So alongside federal funded projects, or any projects that impact air quality also need to be in the tip. So there might be locally funded projects if they're impactful of air quality, that might be in the tip. And then the tip itself is provided to MnDOT after it's approved, and they'll incorporate into their state transportation improvement program, or STIP. Any project with federal funding in order to get underway has to be in the STIP. So next slide. So I kind of touched on this a bit, but the projects that you'll see in the tip are any transit projects that are programmed by providers with FTA formula funds. Those are more of your local projects, along with some of the really big high-profile projects. Roadway projects programmed by MnDOT with federal and state funds. MnDOT programs the majority of our roadway projects in the tip. Regional solicitation projects. The regional solicitation makes up roughly a quarter of the tip in terms of total federal dollars as well as total projects. And then we do have a small portion of Sherburne and Wright counties that are included in the urbanized area. This happened as a result of the 2010 census. And there actually is also a small piece in Wisconsin across the old Stillwater Bridge, and we haven't had a project in there for a few years, but we have had Wisconsin projects in the tip. That's probably going to go away with the next census, that Wisconsin piece. And I imagine that the Sherburne and Wright counties will remain or even possibly be expanded, but we do work with other outside of the Metro District to get those projects into the tip. So the council approval that we're looking for in a couple weeks would be for the entire 500 and some odd projects that we have in the draft tip. Next slide. So this is the key criteria for not only for approving the tip, but approving tip amendments. And you get this board approves a number of tip amendments throughout the course of the year, usually about 25 or so per year. The tip needs to be fiscally balanced. That is to say that it's not a wish list. It is a program of projects that have a reasonable expectation to be funded. It needs to be consistent with our TPP that you'll be approving every few years, in conformity with Clean Air Act requirements, and that's where I referenced air quality impact projects need to be in there regardless of funding source, and there needs to be an opportunity for public input. And I'll talk a little bit about that with our public comment period that we had over the summer. Next. So here's our schedule, just showing what's happened and happening. TAB did release the draft tip for public review in May. That ended on July 6th. We had comments from well over 100 commenters, and I'll talk a bit about that later. TAB recommended the tip itself for approval at its meeting last month. Here we are in the red at Transportation Committee, and then hopefully the council approves on September 22nd. And then it's provided to MnDOT, who takes our tip as well as other tips and all the projects not in urbanized areas, and creates the STIP, State Transportation Improvement Program, and looks for approval from Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administrations, which usually occurs around November 1st. That bottom bullet there is maybe a little bit on the pessimistic side. It's hopefully going to be early November that will be approved, and then the tip will be in operation. So next. This is a brief little synopsis of how the $5 billion 4-year program is divided. Federal highway funds and federal transit funds make up roughly 60% of that $5 billion, and then local and state funding makes up the rest. So you'll see a lot of the local funding is match of the federal funds. Many of our programs, of course, have an 80-20 split requirement. Next. And this is just another way that it breaks down. This is by mode. You'll see about half of the program is transit projects. Most of the rest of it is highway and road projects. Bike ped only. It says bike ped only because there are bike ped elements as part of a number of the highway and roadway projects. And then other / set aside as TDM is sort of projects that either don't fit into those modes, or sometimes a set aside might be, for example, to replace lighting structures. We don't know where that's going to be in advance, and so they're a little more general as to location. And so those things will be pulled from what's known as a set aside. Next. So I'm going to get into the public comment report a little bit. We work with communications on that, and Sarah Maskey is here if there's any really in-depth questions, but hopefully I can handle it. So I'll move on to the next slide. So we released the public in May. TAB released the tip for public comment, the draft tip, and that went through July 6th. You'll see that this is a newer table we've had for maybe the last 2 or 3 tips that shows how many unique views we've had on our web pages, people that have been reached on Facebook or Twitter. We had 150 people, or not people necessarily, individuals make comments for a total of over 475 comments. And we did have one public meeting that had 26 attendees, but only one person decided to speak at that meeting. You'll see examples of the interest groups that contacted us. Some of these are our own partners that participate a lot in the TAC-TAB process, the counties and cities that you see at the top. Then you'll see a number of nonprofit organizations that have an interest in transportation. And you'll see that we go old school with the Star Tribune advertising, and we also reach out a lot on social media, and of course with the one public meeting. Most of our comments come through email. We did have, I think, 1 or 2 that were mailed, and then of course I mentioned the one in the public comment. I'm sorry, in the public meeting. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about the themes that we saw. And so we had a lot of comments related to acknowledging climate change, the impact of transportation on air quality and climate change. And that sort of took form at times into prioritizing expanding transit, travel demand management, which is ways to sort of maximize the efficiency of our roadways in terms of air quality and emissions, and then bike and pedestrian projects as ways to have non-impactful transportation. We saw these with frequency comments on those themes, and I think there's one more theme slide next. A lot of comments on transitioning from diesel buses to electric, prioritizing electric vehicle infrastructure and electric vehicle adoption, and focusing on electric buses on poor air quality areas. And this is general, how do we reduce vehicle miles traveled, and accelerating and examining traffic fatalities over the course of the pandemic. Those have increased quite a bit, and so that's a concern, is maybe looking at safety projects. So these themes, these are tricky themes that come out over the course of the summer when we're approving the tip at this point. These are more big scale things, and I think Amy's going to talk a little bit more about those, but these are things that sort of get addressed through the TPP process and other processes. So next slide, and that might be Amy's. Amy, is this you or is this me?
I can take this one, Joe. So,
Okay.
So Joe talked about the number of public comments we got this year, and for the past 2 years, we have really been surprised at the huge and rapid increase in commenters and comments. And as this slide indicates, the comments we're getting tend to be very high level, big picture. Almost none of them are about specific projects. And so when we come to respond to the comments, and the tip at its heart is a list of specific projects that we're going to be funding over the next 4 years, it's really difficult to figure out how to incorporate the feedback. And one of the things that we had a long conversation with TAB a bit over is there seemed to be some surprise that there was not direct impact on the tip itself. And so one of the things we're here to talk about a little bit today is that when we get these high level comments, we might not have a direct impact in the immediate tip, but we definitely use the comments, we listen to the comments. They're a big part of how we think about our planning activities into the future. They're a big part of how we think about our process for updating the TPP. And so while in general, there is not a change to the tip in response to the comments received, there is a big response in terms of what we're going to be doing in the future with our planning work. So next slide, please. So one of the things we wanted to point out is a number of studies that are either ongoing or that we will be implementing in the next year or so. And you will be approving our Unified Planning Work Program, which is the annual look at the planning work that we do. And I think that is coming next month. So a lot of these studies you will see directly in the UPWP. And I just wanted to point out a couple of studies in particular that relate to both the climate change, VMT, and the equity comments that we have been receiving over the past few public comment processes. I think we were in front of this committee 6 months or so ago about the first project, A Path to Accelerate Electric Vehicle Adoption in the region. That project is almost completed. It's developing a number of actions or strategies that we can implement in the region to help accelerate electric vehicle adoption. And this is not specific to transit vehicles, but really is looking at the vehicle fleet over the region as a whole, and how can we encourage private individuals and businesses, and what do we need to supply in terms of electrification network for that to happen. So that's a pretty big project we're looking forward to the results on. We also have our regional travel demand management study, the third bullet on this list. That study is really going to develop, again, actions or strategies that the region should be taking to primarily encourage continued teleworking and use of alternative modes, as we've seen during COVID. To some degree, we've had huge success during COVID in TDM, and we want to learn from that and make sure we continue to encourage that into the future. That is just going to be kicking off late this year, and then we'll go through next year, and will highly inform our 2050 planning work. We have our equity evaluation of regional transportation investment. We're hoping to go out to bid for that in just a matter of weeks, and that will go all through next year. Really evaluating how we invest in transportation and taking an equity lens to those processes and coming up with actions and strategies to make the processes more equitable. We have a master contract we will be implementing to do engagement with BIPOC populations, really looking for expertise in how we do that engagement and not kind of reinventing the wheel with every project, but being able to rely on ongoing contracts and expertise to help us do that with each of our projects. And then further down the list, we have our regional transportation and climate change measures. This is work we're going to be doing jointly with MnDOT. The VMT as a measure and as a target, and what we do with VMT will be highly embedded into that specific project. It will also identify other climate change measures across the modes that we should be implementing and potentially setting targets for. And again, that work will highly inform the 2050 planning work that is coming up in the next couple of years. So we have a lot going on, a lot of it related to climate change, a lot of it related to equity. And we just wanted to kind of hit home on that point because, as I said earlier, while we don't see specific changes to the tip, we do pay attention to all of the comments and themes that we identify across our public comment processes. I'm not sure, is there a next slide? That's what I thought. We should be done. So I can take any questions or Joe can take any questions too.
Are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Chambliss.
Not really any questions. I'm just really very pleased with the insight that was taken in terms of putting these goals together, and very comprehensive. The electrification in the region, very exciting. I'm sure our stakeholders are going to be very pleased with that. And just being, forward thinking in terms of, what's been happening recently with the pandemic and how the teleworking is having a much bigger impact than we had ever imagined, and what does that mean for how we work. And I'm kind of interested in how that evaluation is going to impact how we work at Metropolitan Council as well, because we have to be the role models for that. So thank you so much.
And thank you for your comments, Reva, and thanks to Amy, Steve, Joe, Sarah, because they put a lot of thought into this, and I really think it's really reflected well in the presentation today. Are there any other questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-241.
I recommend approving that motion.
Very good. Moved by Chambliss. Is there a second?
Second by Gonzalez. Seconded.
Seconded by Gonzalez. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none. Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson, Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much, and thank you, Joe and Amy, for presenting.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Next, we're on to business item 2021-227, a joint committee item. It is the 2021 third quarter budget amendment, and we have Ed Petrie and Heather Augustin-Huebner here to present.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Great, thank you very much. Once again, Ed Petrie, I'm Director of Finance with Metro Transit. And with me this evening is Heather Augustin-Huebner. She's the Director of Finance and Administration for Metropolitan Transportation Services. We're going to go through the third quarter capital and operating budget amendments. I will go through the Metro Transit portion, stand for any questions, then turn it over to Heather. The budget amendment this evening item is the 2021 Unified Budget, 2021 Budget Amendment for third quarter. The amendment this evening includes both changes to the capital and the operating amendment. This amendment, I do want to make the point, it's one of our smaller amendments we do have during the year. The second quarter amendment, which is one that we brought in last quarter, is generally our largest one, because that generally reflects when all the federal funds have been applied for, have been approved, we bring the funds in. So this is one of the smaller ones that we're bringing forward. So on the Metro Transit portion of it, I will move into that first. The Metro Transit portion on the capital side, first of all, includes 3 administrative adjustments. For the green line, we're utilizing the funds within the project, moving them within various projects within the green line so we can use and spend out the money. We're also then closing 5 projects as they are now completed. And we're going to close those projects and remove any balances that are left, move it back into the capital program. But the meat of the budget amendment is on authorizing new projects for Metro Transit. This is, as I mentioned, it's one of our smaller amendments for Metro Transit. The 2021 federal grants have now been completed, authorized, approved by the federal government, and then they're now ready to bring the rest of the projects into our capital budget. So I'll go over some of those budget adjustments. First of all, the first one includes Metro Gold Line. Actually, with the Metro Gold Line, we are actually returning some remaining funds. We're done with the project development phase. So there's some funds remaining that will now be returned to the funding partners, Washington County, Ramsey County, and Ramsey Regional County Railroad Authority. So we'll remove those funds. But the other portion of the project is actually bringing in funds based upon the completion of the federal grants and with the associated match. Many of these projects, all the projects first of all were in the planned CIP, council adopted capital budget and plan that you adopted back in December, bringing those projects forward. For Metro Transit, some of the projects include LRT collision, reconstruction equipment, HASTA scheduling and software upgrades, ADA bus stops, non-revenue vehicle and equipment replacements, bus repair associated capital maintenance, BRT midlife overhauls for our A-line buses, communication equipment, and Metro Transit fuel management systems. So with that, Madam Chair, that's the capital portion of the Metro Transit amendment. I would stand for any questions before I move on to the operating.
Sorry, I muted myself.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so any questions from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, go ahead with the operating side.
Great, thank you, Chair. On the operating side for Metro Transit, we're making just 3 adjustments to the 2021 operating budgets. The adjustments are for salary and benefit increases that were not originally included in the 2021 operating budget. When we originally built the 2021 operating budget, all labor contracts and agreements, et cetera, were not settled. So now as the result of settling these agreements, we now know what the labor increases are going to be. So we're bringing in those adjustments in the 2021 budget. It's for the bus system, it's approximately $10.1 million. Rail system, it's just under 1.7 million. And for North Star, it is 153,000. So these are adjustments to the 2021 operating budgets for Metro Transit. So with that, Madam Chair, I would stand for any questions before we turn it over to Heather.
All right, any questions from council members?
One question.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, the adjustments are based on what ended up being the results of the union discussions and compromises. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, committee members, that's correct. Because when we originally built the 2021 budget, we did not know what those final parameters were going to be. So now that they've been settled, we can now implement that into the 2021 budget. That is correct.
Okay, and it looks like you have the biggest difference in Metro Transit bus operations.
And Madam Chair, committee members, and the reason that would be, for example, is with the ATU contract. The ATU contract represents all the operators and mechanics, fuels, parts, and cleaners. So it's the largest portion of the FTEs for the council.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any additional questions? All right, thank you, Ed. We'll turn it over to Heather.
Hi, Madam Chair, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am. Welcome.
Right, so again, Heather Augustin-Huebner, the Finance Director for MTS. Similar to Metro Transit, this is a really small budget amendment for MTS. So there's 2 projects on the capital side I want to call out. First, we're bringing in just about $1.3 million in federal funds and about $305,000 of RTC funds to purchase 3 30-foot buses for Southwest Transit. It's for an expansion grant that was awarded by the Transportation Advisory Board through the regional solicitation, and the council is providing the match on this project, and it was in the CIP. Second, we're bringing in just over $1.6 million of RTC to begin implementation of a system-wide fare box replacement project. This is a large project. You're going to be seeing us roll this out in phases over the next couple years. The MTS side of the budget will house the replacement dollars for not only the MTS fleet, but the regional fleet. So the suburban transit providers will be covered under our budget as well. So if you hear, well, who's paying for the suburban transit provider portion, that side of the implementation project resides in our budget. Lastly, you're going to see 2 projects that are opening and closing in the same budget amendment. As we were doing normal kind of reconciliation after the Q2 budget amendment, we identified an administrative error, and to correct that error, we needed to reopen the project and then close it. So what the end result of this is going to be is there's going to be $546 moving to the small bus undesignated account, and $1,872 to the MBTA undesignated account. So it's a really small dollar amount, but we wanted to make sure that we brought it through and got all the dollars exactly right. On the operating side, we are doing the same thing you just heard from Ed at Metro Transit. So we're going to be increasing salaries and benefits by $228,480. It's a lot smaller dollar amount. MTS has a much smaller number of employees, as most of our service is provided by contracted service providers rather than in-house staff. So this budget amendment demonstrates a commitment towards asset preservation and also supports the Thrive outcomes of stewardship by assessing the future needs, responsible planning and management of resources for Metro Transit and Metropolitan Transportation Services. The amendment adds funding that reflects a strategic investment in regional infrastructure that will promote economic competitiveness and create prosperity for the region. Our requested action is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the 2021 unified budget as indicated and in accordance with the attached tables, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Heather. Are there any questions from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-227 JT.
This is Fredson. I move the staff recommendation.
It's moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Seconded by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none. Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson, Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Ed and Heather.
Thank you.
Next, we are on to business item 2021-239. It's Southwest LRT North Shore Track Service Amendment 2 for Bass Lake Spur Freight Rail Maintenance and Repair. And we have Jim Alexander here to present.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. This is Jim Alexander, Project Director for the Southwest LRT. So tonight I have an item for an amendment to an existing contract we have, and I'll give you a little background on this first. We're talking about the Bass Lake Spur, which is the freight line that the Southwest LRT will run alongside, essentially from St. Louis Park out to Hopkins. There's really two segments of this. It's about a 6.8 mile long freight line, which the council owns as part of the agreements we made with the railroads as we started this project. And there's a Bass Lake Spur East, which is being maintained by our civil contractor, London Crossan joint venture. And then there's a west part that is being maintained by North Shore Track Services, and that's under an existing contract we have with them that was signed back in June of 2019. And we have been working with those folks for quite some time on that contract, and we realized we need to add some more money to that contract to do some urgent repairs back in earlier this year. But we are looking to do a new procurement, and that's currently in process. We received one bid back in July of this year, and that's currently being evaluated for responsiveness. And so we're coming up to a time where we need to continue with some repairs that are needed for that western segment of the freight rail line. And if a rebid is necessary for that procurement that we went out on, we will need to amend this contract. So tonight's item is to add $678,053 to the existing contract for a total of $2,295,151.01 to that contract. If it finds that rebid is not necessary, then Amendment 2 will not be pursued at this juncture. So we did want to mention the original contract that we did have signed back in 2019 did not have a DBE goal, and on this new procurement, there's been assessed a 9% goal by OEO for the new contract. So, Madam Chair, I have item tonight that the Met Council authorized the regional administrator to negotiate and execute amendment number 2 to contract 18P387 with North Shore Track Services for Bass Lake Spur freight rail maintenance and repair to add $611,678.53 for a total contract amount of $2,295,151.01. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Alexander, it seems to me I remember from before that you mentioned that this is very specialized work and there are not a lot of firms that do this type of work, which is the reason that there are few bids. Am I remembering correctly?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, that is correct. It's, in fact, I think the original procurement, we may have just received one, if not one, maybe we had 2 proposers, but we only received 1 proposer on this recent solicitation. So it is rather limited. And maybe before I go on, I just want to mention another important point why we're doing this. This is a requirement that we have with our existing agreement with Twin City and Western Railroad for the construction and co-location agreement that we have in place, that we have the responsibility of taking care of this line, and the project specifically has responsible for the cost of these services until we get to revenue service for the Southwest LRT line.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there additional questions or comments from council members? All right, then I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-239.
Cummings moves approval.
It's moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Zarin seconds.
Seconded by Zarin. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson, Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin,
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much, Jim. And that concludes our business for the evening. As far as consent, I would propose that items 1 and 3 move on consent to the full council, and the budget amendment, as usual, would go to the full council. If there's no disagreement. All right, hearing none, we'll move on to our information item. Our information item is the Metro E-Line Draft Corridor Plan. We have Kyle O'Donnell Burrows here tonight to present.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. And I'll just wait for the, very good. So as you say, my name is Kyle O'Donnell Burrows, and I'm here to provide an update on the E-Line corridor, on the E-Line draft corridor plan prior to its release for public comment next week. We'll plan to cover at a high level what will be included in that plan, as well as our approach to public engagement on the plan and some of the planning history on the E-Line, excuse me, that got us to this point. So thank you for having me here this afternoon. Next slide, please. Before we get too far into the details, I do want to provide a quick overview of the E-Line corridor. So the E-Line will substantially replace the existing Route 6 and will run from the University of Minnesota area via 4th and University through downtown and uptown via Hennepin Avenue, and then onto the Southdale Transit Center through the Chain of Lakes area and Linden Hills, and then France Avenue. Excuse me. Route 6 is one of our highest ridership routes. Before the pandemic, it was the 5th highest ridership route in the Metro Transit system. During the pandemic, it has remained a high ridership corridor, a high ridership route. It is one of our core local routes that tends to have a lot of different trip purposes and trip types that has proven to be, relatively robust to the shock of the pandemic. The E-Line is a fully funded project and targeted for opening in 2025. And we have a $60 million preliminary budget, which will be refined, obviously, as the project continues to advance. Next slide, please. And then I want to take us into a little bit of the early planning on the E-Line. In 2012, actually, the arterial transitway corridor study determined that the Hennepin Avenue corridor, as it was known at that point, was a good candidate for BRT implementation, but that additional study was needed to sort of refine the potential alignment and its relationship to the existing local bus network. And so in 2018 and 19, we initiated the E-line corridor study to essentially do that refinement and evaluate a number of potential E-line alternative alignments, as well as develop concept station locations at sort of a conceptual intersection level, and the service plan for, excuse me, for both the E-line and for the proposed modified Route 6, which would operate once the E-line began operation. And that service plan, concept service plan, includes the E-line running at every 10 minutes for most of the day, just like the rest of our arterial BRT network, and then has the modified Route 6 running every 20 minutes for most of the day from Minnesota Drive and France Avenue, south of the Southdale Transit Center, along Xerxes Avenue, and then into uptown and downtown via Hennepin Avenue. And that essentially retains what the Route 6 does on that segment today from Minnesota Drive to downtown. And then the Route 6 would be discontinued on France Avenue, and then north of downtown on 4th and University, replaced by the E-line. And you probably recall that the E-line alignment was adopted by the Metropolitan Council following the completion of this study back in January of 2020. Next slide, please. So following the completion of that corridor study, we began work on the draft corridor plan, which is sort of what we'll be releasing for public comment next week. Following the public comment period through October on the draft corridor plan, we will plan to make the revisions as needed to that plan and come back to the council in January to authorize a release of the recommended corridor plan for public comment. And then following that public comment period, we'll come back we'll seek council action to approve the final corridor plan in the spring of 2022. At that point, we'll then transition into the engineering phase of the project and target construction beginning in 2024. Next slide, please. And so now getting into kind of the meat of the draft corridor plan, we'll review that at a high level. Obviously, each station has much more detail that will be available for everyone's review next week. But at a high level, what is included in the draft corridor plan is essentially the planned station locations for each station along on the E-line alignment. And then at that station location, where are the specific platforms for that station going to be located at that intersection? Will they be near side or far side or around the corner, et cetera? You can see here, this slide shows an example of one aspect of how that looks in the plan. It's an aerial view of the proposed platform locations at 39th and Sheridan. And this piece of information here, this level of information, kind of indicating where the platforms are in red on the aerial, will be included for every station within the E-line. And then for many stations, we'll include some additional information, which is on the next slide. So we can head to the next slide, please. Great. So the real core element of the plan that many stations will show kind of at this conceptual level is a comparison between the existing condition at that intersection and then what would change, what the intersection could look like with the implementation of the E-line, including that platform location, and then starting to show conceptually what the design might look like. So here you can see at 39th and Sheridan, a little bit more detail about how the platforms might look and interact with the intersection and sidewalk, et cetera. And so this level of information will be included for all of the station locations within the E-line that are not associated with um, a project that, a coordinated project that on that particular roadway segment that's being led by one of our partner agencies, either city or county or MnDOT in one particular case. And in those cases, stations included in those coordinated projects, the design is kind of being advanced through those projects in a little bit more detail. And so we don't produce these conceptual layouts in the draft corridor plan, though of course there are public comments periods and public comment processes through those associated plans as well. And of course, I think an important caveat to note with this information here is that these are conceptual, and these concept designs will continue to evolve as we advance the project through design and engineering phase of the project, as we start to get into more detailed development, and as well as continued coordination with our agency partners and right-of-way owners. Next slide, please. So speaking a little bit more detail on that coordinated projects piece, there are actually quite a number of projects in various stages of design, planning, or construction along the E-line corridor. And as I noted, the planning for those station locations within those other roadway projects has typically advanced through coordination with those projects. And those station plans specifically are not included in the corridor plan. Though I do want to emphasize the platform location. So if you recall, kind of back in terms of the aerial view indicating where the platform would be at the intersection is included for these projects as well. So folks will have an understanding of where we intend the platforms to be, if not a little bit more of that advanced conceptual level detail. And then the other thing to note here as well is that we are coordinating with the city of Minneapolis and Hennepin County through these other projects on potential bus-only lanes and implementation of other bus priority treatments as those kind of projects are continuing to be developed. Obviously, I think notably the Hennepin Hennepin South project between Uptown Transit Station, Lake Street area, and Franklin and Douglas is sort of a key element of that piece of coordination there, though others are in progress as well. Next slide, please. And so our public engagement strategy is really focused sort of online as kind of the key focus there. We'll have the public comment period will begin next week and continue through the end of October 31st. And our real effort there will be driving people to the project website. And that website will be fairly robust. It will have the plan itself, obviously, for review and download if folks are interested to read through the entire plan, as well as having individual web pages for each individual E-line station, showing those aerial views or the existing condition and concept and planned station area concept for folks to review in a little bit more detail, sort of at a more accessible way than having to kind of scroll through an entire plan just to get to the station or two that they care about specifically. And those pages will link to a survey with folks being able to provide comment directly on those particular stations. Some of the primary techniques we'll be using, I think we'll be using a direct mailer, postcard going out to residents and businesses along the corridor. We of course have a number of subscription lists, both of the E-line project update list as well as our rider alerts and some other email lists that we will utilize. and are also targeting some in-person feedback and in-person informing about the project in particular at bus stops, getting out and obviously being cognizant of the current pandemic situation, but wanting to make sure that we're meeting people where they are out in our system as well. And then partnering with community organizations and neighborhood groups along the corridor to be participating in their meetings and events, et cetera. Flyers and social media, of course, will be a big piece as well. Next slide, please. And then just kind of reiterating here our next steps in the overall project schedule. So we'll be, as I've noted here, releasing the draft corridor plan next week. It'll go live on our website next week, and then that'll be accompanied with with a communications push through those channels as well, and then seeking feedback through the end of October. And then, as I noted previously, we'll be taking that feedback and developing the recommended corridor plan for council action to release for public comment in January, and then coming back to the council for final plan approval in March of 2022. And then construction in 2024 and 25. And with that, I will stand for questions or comments.
Thank you, Kyle. Are there any questions from council members? It's awfully quiet. But I'm not sure if it's just my screen not responding. So I'll just make a comment. I'm really excited to see this project moving forward and see the continued build out of our ABRT system. It's really exciting, and you guys have just done such a nice job of planning. And every time you do this, you improve on the public outreach and how you're doing it and meeting the community where they are. And I think that, we really want to make sure that y'all recognize for what the team there has done with all of this over time. It's really impressive. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Just ditto to what you just said, Chair Barber.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Yeah, it's always nice when you to come with good news and leave us smiling, Kyle.
Happy to do it any opportunity I get.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, keep us posted, especially after you go up for public comment. We'd love to hear some feedback of what the community thinks, because this is a big part of the connections throughout the system. So very good.
Great.
All right. If there's nothing else from other council members. All right, then we are actually done for the evening. So you get a little time back, which is not always the case with transportation committees. So enjoy it. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.